Have you ever wondered why some people seem untouchable by drama, criticism, or rejection, while others crumble at the slightest disapproval? Today, we're diving into something that will fundamentally shift how you see emotional pain. Because what if I told you that the deepest wounds aren't inflicted by what others do to you, but by what you allow them to do? What if the power to hurt you has always been in your hands, and you've been unconsciously handing it over? This is about emotional sovereignty, the day you stop giving others the keys to your peace. And once you understand this, nothing and nobody will hurt you the same way again. Let me paint you a picture. You're scrolling through your phone, and you see that friend who didn't respond to your message posting stories with other people. Your stomach drops. Your mind starts racing. Did I say something wrong? Are they avoiding me? Am I not important enough? And just like that, your entire mood shifts. Your day is ruined by someone who probably hasn't even thought about you once. This is what happens when we live with our emotional centers outside of ourselves. When our peace depends on external validation, external responses, external approval. But here's what most people don't realize. This isn't natural. This isn't how it has to be. This is learned behavior, and anything learned can be unlearned. Carl Jung called it individuation, the process of integrating all aspects of yourself to become whole. But what does that actually mean in practice? It means recognizing that your emotional reactions aren't just happening to you. They're happening because of deep-seated patterns you've developed over years, maybe decades. Patterns that once served you as a child seeking safety and belonging. But now, they're keeping you trapped in cycles of emotional vulnerability. Jung talked about confronting the shadow, those parts of ourselves we'd rather not acknowledge. And one of the biggest shadows most of us carry. The belief that our worth comes from outside ourselves, that we need others to validate us, approve of us, choose us, before we can feel safe and whole. But this belief is exactly what gives others the power to wound us. Let's talk about attachment theory for a moment. We learn early in life that love equals safety, that approval equals security. So we develop strategies to ensure we get that love and approval. We become people pleasers. We overgive. We sacrifice our own needs to keep others happy. We learn to read micro-expressions, to anticipate moods, to mold ourselves into whatever shape will earn us connection. And for a while it works. Sort of. But here's the trap. When your entire emotional ecosystem depends on external factors, you become chronically unstable. You're only as secure as your last interaction, only as worthy as your last compliment, only as valuable as your last invitation. You're living in emotional poverty, constantly begging for scraps of validation from a world that doesn't owe you anything. I want you to think about two types of people you've probably encountered. The first, the people pleaser. She says yes when she means no. She gives until she's empty, then gives more. She checks her phone obsessively, analyzing every delayed response, every read receipt. She explains herself constantly, apologizes for existing, shrinks to make others comfortable. She believes that if she just loves hard enough, gives enough, sacrifices enough, she'll finally be valued. But here's what happens instead. She becomes emotionally drained, resentful, and somehow, despite all her giving, still feels unloved and unworthy. Because she's teaching people that her boundaries don't matter, that her needs are secondary, that she's available for whatever others need from her. The second type, the protector. She knows her worth isn't up for negotiation. She gives from abundance, not desperation. When someone treats her poorly, she doesn't spiral into self-doubt. She simply notes their behavior and adjusts accordingly. She doesn't explain her boundaries. She doesn't justify her distance. She doesn't chase people who make her feel small. She's learned something profound: that emotional safety comes from within, not from controlling how others treat her. Which one feels more peaceful to you? But there's a third archetype I want you to consider, one that's even more hidden: the unheard self. This is the version of you that gave too much and expected so little in return that you became invisible even to yourself. You became so focused on managing others' emotions, anticipating others' needs, that you forgot you had needs too. You became the sacrificial self, always available, always understanding, always flexible. And the tragedy? You remained unnoticed, unappreciated, unseen, until you finally learned to draw boundaries. But here's what's beautiful about this archetype. Once awakened, it transforms into something powerful. The integrated self, no longer reactive to external drama, no longer seeking validation from sources that cannot provide true worth. This version of you understands emotional sovereignty. You become clear, selective, and whole. You stop handing out access to your softest places to people who haven't earned it. Now let's talk about why this is so hard to understand in our current cultural moment. We live in a society that profits from our insecurity. Social media algorithms literally make money from our need for validation, our fear of being left out, our compulsion to seek approval. We're told that love is supposed to hurt, that relationships require sacrifice, that if someone isn't texting back, we should text more. We're sold the idea that emotional availability means emotional accessibility, that if we're not constantly open, constantly giving, constantly accommodating, we're cold or selfish. But this is exactly backwards. Real emotional safety doesn't come from making yourself available to everyone. It comes from being highly selective about who gets access to your inner world. It comes from understanding that your peace is not a democracy. Not everyone gets a vote. And here's the deeper fear underneath all of this. The fear that if you stop people-pleasing, stop overgiving, stop being endlessly available, people will leave. The fear that your worth really is conditional, that love really does have to be earned through constant performance. This fear keeps us trapped in cycles of emotional depletion. We give more when we feel disconnected. We explain more when we feel misunderstood. We chase harder when someone pulls away. But what we're really doing is confirming our own worst fear, that we're not inherently valuable. We're teaching people that our love comes with anxiety, our presence comes with neediness, our care comes with expectations. And then we wonder why relationships feel unstable. So what happens if you don't learn this lesson? If you keep handing over emotional control to others? First, chronic emotional depletion. You'll find yourself constantly drained, constantly giving, never feeling like you're getting back what you put in. Because you're not. You're over-functioning in relationships where others have learned to under-function. You've trained people that you'll do the emotional labor for both of you. Second, relationships built on neediness rather than choice. When you operate from emotional insecurity, you don't attract secure, healthy connections. You attract people who are comfortable with imbalanced dynamics, people who like being needed more than they like you. And third, the loss of self. Your identity becomes so enmeshed with external validation that you forget who you are when you're alone. You lose touch with your own preferences, your own instincts, your own inner wisdom. You become a reaction to other people's energy instead of a person with your own center. But there's another way, and it starts with a radical shift in how you understand emotional pain. Most people think pain is something that happens to them. That hurt is unavoidable when others behave badly. But what if pain is actually a choice? Not the initial feeling, that's human. But the extended suffering, the rumination, the stories we tell ourselves about what their behavior means about our worth. That's optional. When someone treats you poorly, you have two options. Option 1. Take it personally. Make it about your worth. Spiral into self-doubt and try harder to earn their approval. Option 2. See it as information about them, not you. Adjust your level of investment accordingly. Protect your peace. The difference between these two responses isn't about being strong or weak. It's about understanding where your emotional center lives. When your center is outside yourself, in how others treat you, what others think of you, whether others choose you, you're at the mercy of forces beyond your control. But when your center is within yourself, in your own standards, your own values, your own clarity about what you will and won't accept, you become emotionally sovereign. This is where Jung's concept of individuation becomes practical. Individuation isn't just psychological theory. It's a daily practice of choosing internal validation over external validation. It's asking yourself, what do I know to be true about this situation, regardless of what anyone else thinks? It's developing such a strong relationship with your own inner wisdom that outside opinions become interesting data points rather than determining factors. It's understanding that the goal isn't to never feel hurt. The goal is to never let hurt determine your worth. And here's what's beautiful about this shift. When you stop seeking validation from others, you paradoxically become more attractive to healthy people. Because emotional sovereignty is magnetic. People who are secure themselves are drawn to others who aren't constantly seeking reassurance. They want partners, friends, colleagues who can stand in their own power without needing constant emotional management. When you stop overfunctioning in relationships, you create space for others to step up. When you stop explaining your boundaries, you discover who respects them without explanation. When you stop chasing people who make you feel small, you make room for people who see your full value. But let's be honest about what this actually looks like in practice. Because this isn't about becoming cold or detached. This isn't about building walls or shutting people out. This is about becoming discerning, selective, intentional about where you invest your emotional energy. It means recognizing that your vulnerability is precious. That access to your deepest self is earned, not assumed. It means understanding that some people in your life have proven they can hold your heart safely, and others haven't. And treating those two groups differently isn't mean, it's wise. The people pleaser gives their heart to anyone who asks. The protector gives their heart to those who've proven they won't drop it. The people pleaser explains why they need space. The protector simply takes it. The people pleaser apologizes for having needs. The protector honors their needs as valid and important. Can you feel the difference in energy there? One is asking permission to exist. The other is stating their existence as fact. One is negotiating their worth. The other has settled the question internally. And this brings us to the hardest part of this journey. The moment when you realize you've been complicit in your own emotional suffering. That the very strategies you developed to keep yourself safe have been keeping you trapped. That seeking validation from others has been the source of your invalidation. This realization can feel devastating at first, because it means taking responsibility for patterns you didn't consciously choose. It means acknowledging that waiting for others to see your worth has been a form of self-abandonment. But this realization is also liberating. Because if you've been giving others the power to hurt you, that means you can take that power back. The integrated self doesn't happen overnight. It's built through 1,000 small choices. The choice to not immediately text back when you're feeling anxious about a conversation. The choice to sit with discomfort instead of rushing to fix or explain. The choice to trust your own perception of a situation even when others disagree. The choice to prioritize your peace over others' approval. Each time you make these choices, you're strengthening your emotional sovereignty. You're proving to yourself that you can exist independently of external validation. You're building a relationship with your own inner authority that becomes stronger than any outside influence. And here's what happens when you truly embody this. People start treating you differently. Not because you've changed them, but because you've changed the dynamic. When you stop seeking validation, people stop withholding it as a form of control. When you stop over-explaining, people stop questioning your choices. When you stop chasing, people start recognizing your value. Because you're no longer teaching them that your worth is negotiable. You're demonstrating through your actions that your emotional center is not for sale. But society will resist this transformation in you. Because emotional sovereignty threatens systems that profit from your insecurity. Consumer culture needs you to believe you're lacking something that can be purchased. Social media needs you to believe your worth comes from external metrics. Even some relationships in your life have been built on your willingness to overfunction emotionally. When you step into your power, these systems and relationships will push back. Some people will call you selfish for having boundaries, cold for not being endlessly available, changed for not accepting poor treatment. And they're right. You have changed. You've remembered that your peace matters, that your emotional energy is finite and precious, that love without respect isn't actually love. This is where we reach the climax of this journey. The moment where you have to choose between two fundamentally different ways of living. Choice 1. Stay vulnerable to others' actions. Keep seeking validation from external sources. Keep living in reaction to how others treat you. Keep sacrificing your peace for the possibility of approval. Keep explaining yourself to people who've already decided not to understand you. This is the path of emotional dependency. It's familiar, but it's also exhausting. Choice 2. Reclaim your emotional sovereignty. Draw boundaries not as walls, but as gates with you as the gatekeeper. Live from your inner clarity rather than external expectations. Stop handing over the keys to your peace to people who haven't earned that level of access. Stop explaining your distance to people who created the need for it. This is the path of emotional protection and wholeness. And here's what I want you to understand about this choice. It's not a one-time decision. It's a daily practice. Every day, you'll face moments where you can choose validation-seeking or self-sovereignty. Every day, you'll have opportunities to either react from your wounds or respond from your wisdom. The difference between people who remain emotionally vulnerable and those who become emotionally sovereign isn't that one group never feels hurt. It's that one group has learned not to make other people's behavior mean something about their worth. They feel the initial sting, acknowledge it, and then choose how much power to give it. They understand that someone else's inability to see their value doesn't diminish that value. They know that rejection, criticism, or indifference from others is information about those people, not verdicts about themselves. This brings us to the practical side of emotional sovereignty, because philosophy without application is just intellectual entertainment. So let's talk about what this actually looks like in your daily life. When someone doesn't text back, instead of creating elaborate stories about what it means, you simply note their level of interest and adjust yours accordingly. When someone criticizes you, instead of defending or explaining, you evaluate whether their opinion carries weight based on their character and your respect for their judgment. When someone tries to guilt you into changing your boundaries, instead of accommodating, you recognize this as manipulation and hold your line more firmly. When someone withdraws their attention or approval to control your behavior, instead of chasing, you let them go and notice how much lighter you feel. This is where attachment theory becomes relevant to your actual experience. Most of us learned early that love and safety must come from others. That if we're not chosen, valued, or approved of, we're somehow deficient. But emotional sovereignty requires recognizing this as a survival mechanism from childhood that no longer serves your adult self. Your worth isn't determined by external validation, because worth isn't something that fluctuates based on opinion. Your peace doesn't depend on how others treat you, because peace is an internal state that you cultivate and protect. Your value doesn't increase or decrease based on who sees it, because value is inherent, not assigned. The unheard self, that version of you who gave everything and expected nothing, carries important wisdom. She knows what it feels like to be taken for granted, to be overlooked, to sacrifice herself for others' comfort. But she also knows what it feels like to finally say enough. To realize that being understanding doesn't mean being available for mistreatment. To understand that being loving doesn't mean being a doormat. To recognize that being kind doesn't mean being naive about people's intentions. The unheard self becomes the integrated self not by hardening her heart, but by honoring it enough to protect it. And this protection isn't about building walls. It's about becoming selective. Think of your emotional energy like a precious resource. Because it is. You wouldn't give your life savings to everyone who asked, would you? So why give your emotional investment to everyone who seems to want it? Emotional boundaries aren't about keeping people out. They're about letting the right people in. They're about creating conditions where genuine connection can flourish, rather than relationships built on neediness and obligation. When you protect your peace, you create space for relationships based on mutual respect rather than emotional survival. But here's where it gets challenging. Because the people who benefited from your boundaryless existence won't celebrate this transformation. The friend who called you when they needed something, but was always too busy when you needed support. The family member who expected endless understanding but never offered the same in return. The romantic interest who kept you on an emotional roller coaster of intermittent validation. These people will resist your new emotional sovereignty. They'll call you selfish, cold, different. They'll try to guilt you back into your old patterns. And this is where you'll discover who genuinely cared about you versus who simply enjoyed having access to your emotional labor. The fear of losing people by setting boundaries reveals something important. If someone only wants you when you're accommodating their poor treatment, do you really have them to begin with? If someone withdraws when you start honoring your own needs, were they ever truly investing in your well-being? Real connection doesn't require you to sacrifice your peace. It enhances it. Real love doesn't make you feel small. It helps you feel more like yourself. Real friendship doesn't drain your energy. It replenishes it. When you start operating from emotional sovereignty, you discover which of your relationships were built on genuine care and which were built on convenience. This is the deeper fear, isn't it? That if you stop being endlessly available, endlessly understanding, endlessly accommodating, you'll end up alone. That your people-pleasing personality is the only thing making you lovable. That underneath all that giving and explaining and chasing, there's nothing worth staying for. But this fear is based on a lie you learned when you were too young to know better. The lie that love is earned through performance rather than given through recognition. The truth is, the people who truly see you don't need you to dim yourself to feel comfortable. They don't need you to sacrifice your peace to prove your love. They don't need constant access to your emotional labor to feel connected. And when you stop offering these things, something beautiful happens. The relationships that survive this shift become deeper, more authentic, more nourishing, because they're built on choice rather than need, on respect rather than expectation, on genuine appreciation rather than assumed availability. You start attracting people who value emotional sovereignty in themselves and others. People who don't need you to manage their emotions or fix their problems. People who see your boundaries not as rejection, but as self-respect. People who understand that your peace is not something they're entitled to disrupt. The consequences of not learning this lesson extend far beyond relationships. When your emotional center lives outside yourself, you become chronically anxious, because you're trying to control variables that aren't actually under your control. How others feel about you, what others think of you, whether others choose you. You exhaust yourself trying to manage impressions, anticipate reactions, prevent disappointments. You live in a constant state of emotional vigilance, always scanning for signs of disapproval or rejection. And this hypervigilance doesn't make you safer. It makes you more vulnerable, because when your attention is constantly focused outward, you lose touch with your own inner guidance system. But emotional sovereignty changes everything. When your peace comes from within, you become unshakable in a way that has nothing to do with arrogance or coldness. You simply stop taking other people's behavior personally because you understand it's usually not about you anyway. You stop seeking validation because you've developed a relationship with your own worth that doesn't require external confirmation. You stop fearing rejection because you understand that incompatibility isn't a judgment of your value. You become emotionally self-sufficient, which paradoxically makes you more attractive to emotionally healthy people. And here's what I want you to understand about the journey toward emotional sovereignty. It's not about never feeling hurt. It's about changing your relationship with hurt. It's not about becoming invulnerable. It's about becoming selective about who gets to impact your emotional state. It's not about not caring what others think. It's about caring more about what you think. It's not about isolation. It's about connection from a place of strength rather than need. The goal isn't to become someone who can't be touched by others. The goal is to become someone who chooses how they're touched by others. So here we are, at the moment of choice. You can continue living with your emotional center outside yourself, constantly seeking validation, constantly vulnerable to others' moods and behaviors. You can keep handing over the keys to your peace to people who haven't earned that level of access. You can keep explaining yourself to people who've already decided not to understand. Or you can begin the journey toward emotional sovereignty. You can start asking yourself, what story am I telling myself about this pain? Who earns my vulnerability? Where am I still handing out access to my softest places to people who can't handle them with care? You can stop offering emotional labor to those who haven't earned it. You can protect your peace by living according to your own standards and clarity, not others' expectations. Because here's what happens when you truly embrace emotional sovereignty. You become untouchable in the most beautiful way. Not because you don't care, but because you care enough about yourself to be selective about who gets to influence your inner world. Not because you're closed off, but because you're so open with the right people that you can afford to be protective with the wrong ones. Not because you don't love deeply, but because you love from abundance rather than desperation. When you reclaim your emotional boundaries and stop seeking validation from sources that cannot provide true worth, you discover something revolutionary. You stop allowing pain and manipulation to affect your self-worth because you finally understand that your worth was never up for debate in the first place. With this awareness, with this practice, with this commitment to your own emotional sovereignty, nothing and nobody will hurt you the same way again. The choice is yours. The power has always been yours. The question is, are you ready to take it back? Subscribe if you're ready to stop giving others the power to hurt you. And hit that notification bell if you want to dive deeper into the psychology of emotional transformation. Your sovereignty starts now.